everyone. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me today I have
Carter Li from SWTCH Energy Inc.
And I'm Deepak Darda from IBI Group.
And we're talking today specifically about a project that's going to involve electrification of a building and the blockchain and charging vehicles. So I guess I'll start with Carter. How did this all start with, and how did you get involved on the technology end of things?
Yeah, so SWTCH was started around essentially solving our own selfish challenges of trying to own an electric vehicle while living in a downtown urban setting. So, my story was I was looking into purchasing an EV for myself, and I was living in a downtown apartment in Toronto, and in Canada, and I did the usual process of talking to my property management company, then, to the condo board, and realized it was a very difficult situation. So, our company was formed to really address that issue around, addressing the barriers of providing electric vehicle charging infrastructure within high density buildings. So, fast forward a couple of years, we developed the product, and the service and the app and everything. And, a big part of the barrier to providing electric vehicle infrastructure within buildings, especially not brand new buildings, is that the very limited electrical infrastructure capacity of buildings. So, the idea of using electric vehicles and drawing all that power, from these existing electrical panels is a big challenge. But the opportunity is that these electric vehicles also have really sizable batteries in them. So the concept of how do we make it easier for the electrical infrastructure to provide charging for residents and tenants of buildings, and potentially even provide a asset where real estate developers, property management companies could monetize this asset. That's really came to that kind of collaboration with IBI.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's where I should jump in with Deepak. Ask how you got involved in this project.
Yeah, so we have interesting sort of journey to this project. Like part of our 3 years back, we had laid out a vision that we want to sort of transform the company into a technology-driven design firm. We are primarily an architecture engineering company, but 20% of our business is in technology. So at that point, we said, like, for us to really accelerate our technology journey, we need to look into partnerships, both with larger corporates as well as younger, newer startups, which are doing fascinating work in the technology space. And one of the areas we definitely wanted to sort of progress more was energy. So as a result of that, we had approached OPG, which is one of the largest power generating company here in Ontario. And when we were just and they came and they became a part of our sandbox. So we formed a sandbox where we got some of the larger corporates like OPG, Alstom, Slate, Weather Network are involved, along with Microsoft as a technology partner. And we started looking at what are the kind of challenges that are going to come in the world as we look forward, and can we together solve it? And if there is something that we cannot solve, are there technological startups that we can go and actually look for solutions? So in one of the discussions, where we were having with OPG, they said their intent was actually how do they reduce the amount of investment that they have to do in the grid, because with every day the demand for power is going up. Our cities are growing, which requires more power. And they are looking at ways in which how they can actually reduce the dependence on grid, and how different energy sources can actually be used to reduce the dependence on grid. And that's where it started striking us that, okay, like, what about EV vehicles? The EV vehicles are increasing. Can the EV vehicles be the distributed sources of energy? And that sort of brought this idea to light. And then we were lucky enough to sort of at that point connect with Carter, and those ideas aligned, where we said, okay, it makes a lot of sense for us to test some of these scenarios where EVs can be distributed energy sources that can be used not only to get power from the building to EVs, but EV can be a distributed energy source to power the building back to cut the peak hour electrical uses. So that's how we got involved, and through our sandbox, we got Slate, which is the building owner, involved, and they were kind enough to allow us and Switch to experiment on this wonderful pilot project on their building.
And one of the things that has been mentioned about this pilot is the blockchain is part of it. And when I hear blockchain, and I'm sure this is the millionth time you've heard this, I think of crypto, and I'm sure this has nothing to do with that. But maybe you could explain what the blockchain is for in this particular application.
Sure. So the challenge around energy transactions is usually they're dependent on a very reliable source, which is the utilities. They've been building and metering electricity for over a century now. So, most people are very comfortable with the idea that, where the energy is coming from, how much they're paying for, so on and so forth. But now when you have, distributed energy resources like on-site, solar panels, battery storage systems, and electric vehicles that can, either store or generate electricity and then kind of redistribute it amongst themselves, that gets a little more complicated. How do you trust, your neighbor's Nissan Leaf to be discharged a certain amount, and you use that energy up for your television and et cetera, et cetera. So that's where the challenge comes in terms of having a third party, ledger system that can address the trust issues of what we call behind the meter, behind the fence energy transactions, where the utilities don't have any visibility to. They know that, that X amount of energy goes to the building, but once it's in the building, what happens to it, they don't have much visibility. So that's where the blockchain comes in, to be able to track and meter and bill for the electricity that's going from one distributed energy resource to another.
Okay. And Deepak, just in terms of, well, this is a pilot project, so you could kind of build from the ground up with this. But what would be the challenges, like in terms of, instead of your usual electrification of a building, what do you have to account for that you wouldn't otherwise? Or what are some places where there's new efficiencies you didn't have before?
So, right now what we are seeing is there is EV demand at one level is really increasing, but another level, the developers right now are not really looking into providing those EV infrastructure right now. Like they are just providing the infrastructure, but not really preparing all the building for that. So as a part of what this technology essentially would be doing is as the number of EVs would increase, it just provides another option where we can again use the EV chargers as a distributed energy source to really manage the energy requirements of a building. Like there are special regulations here like ISO, it basically incentivizes the building owner if their uses of electricity is actually lower during the peak hours. So those are certain things that I think will become more and more important as we sort of move forward. And there is a lot of push that is not only happening in terms of multi-residential buildings, but also like in areas like transit, where there is transit electrification that has been talked about. So transit or school buses. So all those vehicles, they are basically energy sources that can be used at different points of time. So that's what we are really looking forward to, as to how these things can interact with the building and vice versa.
And you both mentioned older buildings. Like I would assume that's going to be a big part of this at some point, because retrofitting is key to sustainability, and also it's just more efficient in some ways. So how does retrofitting and working this into an existing system, what are the challenges with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and absolutely one of the most fundamental challenges of putting in these types of assets in a building. Our big focus is integration and ease of use in terms of the integration. It's easy to integrate with a really sophisticated new building. They have cutting edge building energy management systems, cutting edge HVAC management systems, lighting systems, et cetera. But what about all those like, legacy buildings that are running on, Modbus or BACnet kind of really like old building energy management systems. And that's where we really, we see the value in what we're doing is that, yes, there's a lot of exciting technology out there, but if it's not applicable to 95% of buildings, then it's of very little relevance. So for us, when we do a retrofit and be able to tie in electric vehicles into the buildings, we also make sure that we are able to add sensors to very, standard electrical panels that kind of give us more visibility within the building. So, as electric vehicles, the energy profile increases within a building, that's great. It's important for the building to get that visibility, but it's also important for the charging stations to be able to react to like what's going on to the rest of the building. So with that visibility from one to another, our charging stations are able to adapt, when there's like a high peak, during a really hot summer day or a really cold winter day, to be able to turn down dynamically its charging station so that it doesn't affect the overall load of the building. So, and that's without necessarily requiring sophisticated, brand new existing, sophisticated building energy management systems.
Okay, and another question for both of you. I know Google had a smart city sort of plan in Toronto, which kind of fizzled due to privacy concerns. It sounds like this is different. This is distributed. It's kind of self-contained within the building. So, and because of the blockchain, I assume it's private and encrypted. So does this work around some of those concerns that were raised with the sidewalk neighborhood project?
I would say so. It definitely takes a lot of the logistics around shared data between different groups and entities and, buildings and communities. It definitely makes it a little more manageable. Whatever information is being shared is within, very defined members and entities. So, it really is very clear on why there's a collection of data. So I think this definitely makes it a lot easier to implement.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's also limited. The nature of it is limits it to the users of energy at a vehicular level and the charger. So it's more constrained that way rather than like monitoring each and every one in the building or the location.
Okay, and I would ask both of you, where do you see this technology going? Because this is a pilot project, but where, like long term, could you see this sort of developing? Like how scalable is it, I guess, is my question.
For sure. And, my perspective is it's not all or nothing kind of thing. It's not like, the concept of vehicle to building or vehicle to grid is, becoming more and more prevalent. But there's some situations where that just doesn't work. The challenge is like, how do you incentivize just residents of a building to kind of donate their energy from their cars? They might want to use it later on and, to go for groceries or et cetera, et cetera. So it's really a mix of, what we call standard charging stations that like just charge instead of discharge, and then having some bidirectional charging stations that may belong to the security company or the property management company. And this mix of, both, really, really smart EV charging and more regular EV charging with building energy management systems with, solar PVs. It's a spectrum in terms of technology, right? It doesn't have to be everything cutting edge. It doesn't have to be everything super, super basic, and as, the technology within that built environment evolves, you can adopt more sophisticated layers of energy management on top of it. So, I think it's very scalable because it's not, all or nothing. It's like you can add additional pieces to an existing building without, blowing your budget or going way overboard in terms of technology.
And Deepak, from your point of view as a builder, or a builder, technologist, and designer, where would you think this could go?
Yeah, again, like again, from our perspective, I agree with what Carter is saying. I think it is one of the solution. It is not that it is the solution. So it's one of the things that has to be thought about when we are sort of designing systems and solutions for the future as a potential ways for energy management. Um, like there are alternatives that are there. It doesn't mean that we cannot use the alternatives. It doesn't mean that we cannot use a combination of the alternative and the kind of pilot that we are doing. So, like again, the intent of this pilot is just to demonstrate that this is a viable alternative that exists that sort of gives us an opportunity for the future to use it in the mix of alternatives to when we are designing the buildings and the cities for tomorrow.
Okay, and without giving any names away, what kind of interest have you guys seen in the industry?
I think there's, just overall, there's an immense amount of interest to use electric vehicles as energy storage devices, primarily because there's no additional cost, right? Right now, if you want to put in solar panels, it's really beneficial that you have, stationary storage systems, but those are still quite expensive. And the idea is that if you already have electric vehicles within that building and, 95% of the time they're sitting there, the idea of these underutilized assets to be used to improve energy efficiency is really, really exciting to a lot of groups. And particularly around the aspect of no additional costs, because you bought that, that vehicle for your general use anyways. You're just kind of leveraging it being stationary for long periods of time to maximize its value. So, there's a lot of other interesting use cases, like, for example, school bus operators, like school boards, are very interested in this technology because, their school buses are parked there, for a very defined period of time. They know when they're using it, twice a day, but the rest of the other times they're just sitting there. So, if you have large buses, large vehicles, it's a great way to, monetize those assets to kind of improve energy efficiency.
Yeah, like again, we are also seeing a lot of like at least demand and ask that is sort of, or at least people are interested to know about this more, at least on the fleet side, and especially school buses. As Carter said, this is fleet that is just there, which is not utilized for majority of the time. So how can they be used to like to further like again help in this idea of energy management? And as I said, a lot of transit, schools, etc., are also looking about electrification of their fleet. So as more and more they think about that idea, the alternative in terms of what do they do with that fleet when it is not used, essentially that's where the focus also goes. So that's where we are seeing also at least the ask and the demand coming from.
And finally, if our readers and listeners are looking to see more information about this, where should they go on the internet to find out more about this project?
So they can find out more about this on the Smart City Sandbox. As I said, it's a partnership that we have with different companies, along with startups like Switch, and these are the places where we actually publish some of the work that we are doing. So all that information is available. It's also available on our respective websites of IBI, Switch, and Slate. So those will be the places to sort of look for more information.
Okay, great. Carter, anything you can add in terms of information?
No, I think that's it. I think, we it's a really exciting initiative. We're just at the start of it. And I think this could lead to a lot of interesting findings of how we can maximize, energy efficiency within existing buildings.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, guys.